I need to check the names file to make sure I don't reuse any, then write the story. The band names are Claire, Marcus, Vanessa, Dana, Willie, Mr. Holt, Ms. Reeves, Maya, coworker, attorney, Garrett, Bren, Ms. Wren, Albright, Rachel, Serena, Owen, Stevens, Paige, Nathan, Fiona, Jonah, Hollis Carter, Kim, Sergeant Bell, Mom, Maren Caldwell, Tessa, Admiral Thomas Reinhardt, Mrs. Whitford, Cora, Wesley, Adrian, Diego, Joelle, Derek, Priscilla, Whitmore, Dr. Priscilla, Whitmore, Dr. Priscilla, Whitmore, Yvette Lam, Richard Grant, Bridget, Rosie, Caleb, Ellie Solis, Theo, Admiral Doris Kwan, Deputy Director Harlan, Judge Adelaide Quinn, Sloan, Wren, Beckett. I'll use new names: Nora, narrator, Daphne, sister-in-law's Valan, Curtis, sister-in-law Valaine, Curtis, brother, Hale, father. I know what silence sounds like when something is wrong. I learned it early, growing up in a house where my father worked double shifts and my mother held everything together with grocery lists and quiet prayers. Silence there meant peace. It meant everyone was okay. The silence I walked into that Tuesday morning was different. It had weight to it. I'd driven 4 hours from Charlotte to get to my parents' house in Greensboro. My father had passed 6 days earlier. A stroke, the second one, the one the doctors had warned us about for 2 years. I hadn't cried yet, not really, I'd been too busy. Filed the death certificate, called the insurance company, handled the funeral arrangements because my brother Curtis couldn't stop shaking long enough to hold a pen. I'm a paralegal. That's what I do. I organize things when everything else falls apart. I pulled into the driveway at 7:40 in the morning. I hadn't told anyone I was coming that early. I figured I'd let myself in with my key, make coffee, and start sorting through Dad's desk before Curtis and his wife arrived. They were supposed to come at 10. I had 2 hours. The front door unlocked quietly. I stepped inside and set my bag down on the bench by the door. The house smelled like candle wax and my mother's lavender cleaner, the same smell it had carried for 30 years. My throat tightened. I heard voices from the back hallway, low, deliberate. I almost announced myself. That was my first instinct. Call out, let them know I was there. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the tone. Not a conversation. More like a negotiation. I stood still and listened. It was my sister-in-law, Daphne. I'd know her voice anywhere, quick, clipped, always 3 steps ahead of whatever room she was in. She'd married Curtis 11 years ago, and I had never once figured out whether I liked her or just tolerated her. She was on the phone. He signed it already, she said. I told you, before he went into the hospital the second time. Curtis has power of attorney. He doesn't know what that means yet, but I do. So, when the lawyer reads the will next week, I need you to make sure the property transfer goes through before Nora can contest anything. I didn't move. She's going to show up and make it complicated. She always does. Just get it filed, the house, the account, everything, by Thursday. Then she said something that I have replayed in my head every single day since. Nora doesn't know what Dad actually left behind, and I need to keep it that way. I stood in that entryway for what felt like a long time. My hand was still on the strap of my bag. My car keys were in my coat pocket. The coffee maker on the counter was cold. I didn't say anything. I didn't walk back there. I set my bag down more carefully than I'd picked it up. Stepped back outside, pulled the front door closed without a sound, and sat in my car in the driveway. My hands were steady. That surprised me a little. I'd always been the one who got upset at family dinners, who couldn't let things go, who my mother used to say feels everything twice. But sitting in that car, I didn't feel anything twice. I felt it once, clearly, and it told me exactly what to do. I drove to the Waffle House 2 miles away and ordered coffee I didn't drink. I opened my phone and called the one person I trusted completely, my father's attorney. Not the one Daphne had just been talking to. My father's actual attorney. The one who'd drawn up his original documents 10 years ago and updated them 18 months before he died, when he'd first gotten the diagnosis and had finally started planning the way he should have planned years earlier. His name was Mr. Aldridge. He picked up on the second ring. I told him what I'd heard. All of it, word for word, because I have a good memory and I'd been paying attention. There was a pause on his end that lasted just long enough to tell me this was serious. "Nora," he said, "your father came to see me 14 months ago. He updated his estate documents. All of them. I need you to come to my office this morning." I left the Waffle House without touching the coffee. Mr. Aldridge's office was 30 minutes away in a gray brick building off Elm Street. He met me in the lobby himself, which told me something. Attorneys don't usually meet you in the lobby. He brought me into a conference room and set a folder on the table. "Your father was very specific," he said. "He was worried about exactly this scenario. He didn't say it in those words, but he was clear about what he wanted and who he wanted to protect." What was in that folder changed everything I thought I understood about the last 18 months of my father's life. He had updated his will. He had also, and this was the part that Daphne didn't know, the part that her phone call to whoever that was would never fix, revoked Curtis's power of attorney 7 months ago, quietly, without telling anyone in the family, and he had designated me as the sole executor of his estate. Not Curtis. Not Daphne. Me. My father had watched his own family for a long time. He was quieter than people gave him credit for. He noticed things. He'd watched the way Daphne handled money that wasn't hers. The way she talked over Curtis in conversations about finances, the way she'd started asking questions about the house 2 years ago before he was even sick in any serious way. He hadn't said anything to me directly. He just acted. He changed the documents. He made sure I was the one holding the keys. I sat in that conference room for a long time after Mr. Aldridge finished explaining. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry yet. I was just still. The way you get still when something enormous settles into place and you realize the ground under your feet is more solid than you thought. "Does Curtis know?" I asked. "Your father asked me not to tell him until after the reading," Mr. Aldridge said. "He wanted it to come from the documents themselves." I nodded. "When is the will reading scheduled?" "Next Friday. But given what you've told me, I think we should accelerate that conversation. And I'd like to recommend you speak with a civil litigation attorney before then." I did. That same afternoon, her name was Miss Finch, and she was exactly the kind of person you want in your corner when someone has just tried to steal your dead father's house out from under you. Calm, thorough, and deeply unimpressed by people who think they're smarter than they are. I told her everything. She listened with a legal pad in front of her and wrote things down in a handwriting so small I couldn't read it from across the table. When I finished, she set her pen down. "The power of attorney Daphne believes Curtis holds was revoked 7 months ago and never reinstated," she said. "Any property transfer attempted under that authority would be invalid. If someone filed documents using a revoked POA, that's fraud." "She hasn't filed anything yet," I said. "She told whoever she was calling to do it by Thursday." Ms. Finch looked at me. "Then we have time," she said. "But not a lot of it. Here's what I want to explain, because I think people assume that when you're going through something like this, you're falling apart. You're crying in parking lots. You're calling your friends at midnight. Maybe that's true for some people. For me, in those days between my father's funeral and the will reading, I was just working. That's how I grieve. I make lists. I check things off. I move through the problem the way my father taught me to move through problems, which is quietly and completely. I didn't call Curtis. I didn't confront Daphne. I went home, I made dinner, I called my mother, who was staying with her sister in Raleigh, and I talked to her about her garden and whether she was sleeping and what she wanted to do about Dad's truck. I didn't tell her what I'd heard. Not yet. She had enough. I filed the paperwork Miss Finch prepared on Wednesday morning. It was a formal notice to the County Register of Deeds that any property transfer related to my father's estate was under legal review pending the estate administration. It wasn't dramatic. It was one document. 2 pages. It did exactly what it needed to do. On Thursday morning, Daphne's contact, whoever it was, tried to file the property transfer. It was flagged immediately. I found out because Ms. Finch called me at 8:17 in the morning. "It was rejected," she said. The notice worked. I was at my kitchen table with oatmeal in front of me that I hadn't eaten yet. Okay, I said, there's something else. The person who filed was a notary named Kevin Marsh. We've pulled his license history. He has 2 prior complaints for improper document notarization. This may open a separate investigation. I put my spoon down. Okay, I said again. You handled this well, Nora. I want you to know that. Most people in your position would have walked in there that Tuesday morning and said something. You didn't. I thought about my father, the way he used to sit in his recliner and watch the news with the volume low, not because he was hard of hearing, but because he said you could understand things better when you weren't straining to catch every word. You had to let things come to you. I learned it from somewhere, I said. The will reading happened the following Friday. My mother was there. Curtis was there. Daphne was there. I had been to enough estate hearings through my paralegal work to know what the room looks like when something goes differently than someone expected. There's a particular stillness that happens. A recalibration. Daphne recalibrated when Mr. Aldridge announced that the power of attorney previously held by Curtis had been revoked 14 months ago. She didn't make a sound. She just stopped moving. The pen she was holding went still in her hand. Curtis turned and looked at her. That look. I have thought about that look many times since then. He wasn't angry. He was just seeing something he hadn't let himself see before. Mr. Aldridge read the will. My father had left the house to my mother, as I'd expected. He'd left the bank accounts divided between my mother and the 2 of us, Curtis and me, in equal thirds. His truck went to Curtis. His tools went to a neighbor named Floyd who'd helped him with the yard for 15 years, and who I will never be able to talk about without feeling something crack open in my chest. And he had left a letter. 1 page, handwritten, addressed to me. I didn't read it in the room. I folded it and put it in my coat pocket, and I didn't open it until I was home, sitting in my car in my own driveway in Charlotte at 10:45 at night. He wrote the way he talked. Short sentences, no extra words. You always paid attention. I knew I could count on that. I didn't want to worry you while I was still here, but I needed to know you'd be ready. You were always ready. I love you. Dad. That was when I cried. After the will reading, Daphne and Curtis drove back to their house in Wilmington. I don't know exactly what happened between them on that drive. I know what came after because Curtis called me 3 weeks later. He was quiet on the phone for a minute before he said anything. Curtis has always done that, sat with something before he spoke. It used to drive me crazy when we were kids. Now I understand it differently. She's been moving money, he said. Our joint account for about a year. I didn't say anything. I should have seen it, he said. You weren't looking for it, I said. You didn't tell me. When you found out, you didn't call me. No, I said. I didn't. He was quiet again. Because you knew I wouldn't have believed you, he finally said. Yes, another silence. Longer this time? She's going to need a lawyer, he said. I know. The notary. They're investigating him. I know that too. Curtis exhaled slowly. Dad knew, didn't he? He knew, and he didn't say anything to me either. I looked out my window at the street. A neighbor was walking a dog, a big golden retriever that always barked at squirrels. Completely calm tonight. He loved you, I said. He just knew you needed to figure some things out yourself. Curtis didn't say anything for a while after that, but he stayed on the line. And that felt like enough. The investigation into Kevin Marsh, the notary, concluded 4 months later. He lost his license. The person Daphne had contacted, it turned out to be a cousin of hers who worked in the title company, was terminated and faced a separate review. Daphne herself was not criminally charged because the transfer never went through, and Ms. Finch explained to me that intent without action occupies a complicated legal space. What she did face was a civil suit from Curtis over the joint account funds. They settled out of court. I don't know the terms. Curtis and I talk more now than we have in years. We had dinner together last month at my mother's house, the 3 of us, and we sat in the living room afterward in the same spots we'd always sat in as kids, him in the armchair by the window and me on the left end of the couch, and my mother in the middle of everything, the way she'd always been. She asked me at some point in the evening how I'd known what to do that Tuesday morning, why I hadn't said anything when I walked back into that house. I thought about it. Dad always said the loudest person in the room is usually the most scared, I told her. She smiled. Not a happy smile exactly. The kind of smile that means you recognize something. He said that to you too, she said, all the time. She folded her hands in her lap and looked at the chair where he used to sit. He was right about most things, she said quietly. He just had terrible timing telling people. I laughed. Curtis laughed. And for a few minutes in that living room, in the house my father had paid for over 30 years of double shifts and quiet work, we were just the three of us again. The way we'd always been, -1. The house is still my mother's. She's planting tomatoes in the backyard this spring, the same spot she's planted them every year since 1987. The truck is parked in Curtis's driveway in Wilmington. Floyd still comes by on Saturdays to check on the yard, and my mother pays him the same amount Dad always did, which is probably not enough, but Floyd has never once asked for more. I drove back to Greensboro last weekend and sat in my father's recliner. My mother was in the kitchen. I could hear her moving around in there, the same sounds she's made in that kitchen my entire life, and I sat in that chair with the volume low the way he always did. And I let things come to me. He knew. He didn't say it out loud. He didn't warn me or hand me a plan or explain what I was going to find. He just changed the documents and trusted me to know what to do with what I found. That was the most my father thing he ever did, and I think about that a lot, how the people who love you best are sometimes the ones who never explain themselves. They just quietly make sure you're going to be okay. They don't make speeches. They don't warn you about the storm. They just check the foundation while you're not looking and trust that when it rains, the house will hold. His held. We're still in it. People ask me sometimes what I would have done differently, and honestly, the answer is nothing. Not because I handled everything perfectly. I didn't. I sat in a Waffle House for 40 minutes staring at coffee I never touched. I drove to an attorney's office with my hands steadier than my thoughts. I went home that night and made dinner like it was a regular Tuesday because I didn't know what else to do with myself. But I didn't walk back into that house and say what was in my head. That's the thing I'm most grateful for, because here's what I've come to understand about the way actions work in the long run. Not in any spiritual sense, not in the way people talk about the universe balancing things out, but in a plain and practical way. The choices you make under pressure are the ones that determine what you actually get to keep. Daphne made hers. She decided, at some point before my father was even in the ground, that the fastest way to what she wanted was through documents she had no right to touch, with people she had no business calling. That decision didn't just fail. It unraveled everything she'd spent years building: the financial trust, the marriage, the image of someone who had it together. None of it collapsed because I confronted her. It collapsed because she'd already built it on something that couldn't hold weight. I think about my father a lot when I think about this. He wasn't a complicated man. He worked, he paid attention, he kept his mouth shut when other people would have made noise. And when he understood what was happening in his own family, when he saw the shape of it clearly enough to act, he didn't make a scene. He changed the documents. He trusted me. He did the one quiet thing that would matter more than anything loud ever could have. That's the lesson I carry from all of this, if you can call it a lesson. Intelligence isn't about knowing more than the person in front of you. It's about knowing what to do with what you know, and when to do it, and when to do absolutely nothing at all. My father understood that. I had to learn it from watching him and then from being inside a situation where the wrong move at the wrong moment would have cost everything. Integrity works the same way. It's not dramatic. Nobody gives you credit for it in real time. I didn't walk out of that entryway and feel righteous. I felt scared and sad and like I just found out something about my family that I couldn't unknow. But I did the right thing anyway. Not because it felt good, but because it was the only thing I could live with afterward. That's what integrity actually is, not the easy choice or the satisfying one. The one you can still stand behind when the noise dies down. And resilience. I used to think that meant not breaking. I know now it means breaking quietly and still showing up. It means sitting in a parking lot, pulling yourself back together, and driving to the next thing that needs doing. Curtis is doing that now. Slowly, imperfectly, in the way people do when they've had to rethink something they believed for a long time. My mother planted tomatoes this spring. Same spot, same seeds she's used for years, the house held. We're still in it, that's enough.